Have you ever kept fighting a situation you could not change, exhausting yourself in a battle you were never going to win? Maybe you kept wishing things were different instead of accepting what already was. Maybe you spent more energy resisting your reality than actually living within it. Maybe you have learned, or are about to learn, that pain and suffering are not always the same thing. My name is Eli, and today's story is about a small bird who discovered that her greatest suffering was not her injury, but her refusal to accept it. In a peaceful forest beside a quiet pond, there lived a small bird named Pip. Pip had always been one of the most graceful flyers in the forest, soaring effortlessly above the treetops, racing the wind, diving toward the water just to feel the rush of flight. Then one stormy evening, a powerful gust of wind threw Pip violently against a tree branch, injuring her wing badly. When the storm finally passed, Pip tried desperately to fly. She flapped with everything she had, but her wing would not lift her anymore. She fell again and again, crashing onto the forest floor. Days passed. Pip's wing slowly healed, but something had changed. It no longer bent the way it used to. She could walk, she could hop, but she could not fly, not the way she once had. Every morning, Pip watched other birds soar freely above her, and something inside her twisted painfully. "Why did this happen to me?" she cried out one morning, watching a flock glide effortlessly overhead. "This isn't fair. I should be up there with them." She spent her days trying again and again to force herself into the air, throwing herself off branches, flapping desperately, only to crash painfully each time. An old turtle named Moss lived near the same pond, having spent decades slowly making his way along its quiet shores. One afternoon, Moss watched Pip attempt another painful failed flight, crashing once more into the soft grass. "You're hurting yourself," Moss said gently, as Pip lay catching her breath. Pip looked at him bitterly. "I am supposed to fly, Moss. Every bird flies. I am broken. I am nothing without my wings." Moss moved slowly closer, settling beside her. "Tell me, Pip, is your wing causing you pain right now, in this exact moment?" Pip paused, surprised by the question. "No," she admitted. "Not right now. Then what is hurting you?" Moss asked. Pip didn't answer immediately. Moss continued gently. "There is a difference between pain and suffering, young one. Pain is what happened to your wing during the storm. That was real, and it was beyond your control. But suffering, the suffering you are experiencing right now, comes from fighting against what already happened, wishing it were different, refusing to accept what already is." Pip shook her head stubbornly. "But I shouldn't have to accept this. I should be flying. This isn't how my life was supposed to go." Moss nodded patiently. "Perhaps not. But your life is exactly how it is right now, regardless of how it was supposed to go. The storm already happened. Your wing already changed. The question is no longer whether this should have happened. The question is what you choose to do now that it has." Pip stared at the ground, frustration and confusion swirling inside her. "I don't know how to just accept this," she whispered. Moss smiled softly. "You don't have to accept it all at once. But every time you throw yourself off another branch, hoping desperately for a different outcome, you create new pain on top of the pain that already exists. That additional pain, the one you create through resistance, that is suffering. And suffering, unlike the original injury, is something you have more control over than you realize. That evening, Pip sat alone by the pond, watching her reflection in the still water. Her wing, slightly bent, slightly different than before. She thought about Moss's words for a long time. The next morning, instead of throwing herself off a branch again, Pip simply sat by the water's edge, watching it ripple gently in the breeze. For the first time since the storm, she noticed how beautiful the morning light looked, dancing across the water's surface. Slowly, hesitantly, Pip began exploring her world differently. She discovered she could hop quickly along fallen branches, faster than she ever realized. She found that her legs were strong, capable of carrying her swiftly through the underbrush in ways flying never allowed her to fully experience. One afternoon, she discovered she could glide short distances along the water's surface, using her partially functioning wing differently than before, skimming playfully across the pond in a way none of the other birds ever did. "It is different," she said to Moss one evening, sitting contentedly beside the pond. "But it's not nothing," Moss smiled. "It never was nothing. You simply could not see it while you were too busy fighting what you had already lost." Weeks turned into months. Pip's days transformed entirely. She still felt occasional sadness watching birds fly overhead. This was natural. This was simply being honest with her feelings. But that sadness no longer consumed her entire existence the way her earlier suffering once had. One morning, a young sparrow with an injured leg landed near the pond, watching Pip glide gracefully across the water's surface. "How are you so calm about everything?" the young sparrow asked, clearly frustrated with her own injury. "I keep trying to fly like I used to, and I just keep getting more hurt." Pip looked at her with gentle understanding. "I learned something important," Pip said softly. "Pain is what happens to us. Suffering is what we add on top of it by refusing to accept what already happened. The storm took something from me, but I was the one adding more pain every time I refused to accept what remained." The sparrow listened quietly, processing these unfamiliar words. "You don't have to stop feeling sad," Pip continued, "but you can stop fighting reality itself. There is often more peace, and sometimes even more beauty, in what remains than we initially realize." My perspective on this story is simple. We often confuse suffering with pain, believing that accepting our circumstances means giving up or admitting defeat. But acceptance is not surrender. It is simply recognizing reality exactly as it is, rather than how we wish it had been. The storm in your life, whatever form it has taken, already happened. The energy spent wishing it were different, fighting against what already exists, often creates more suffering than the original pain itself. True peace rarely comes from changing what cannot be changed. It comes from accepting reality fully and then discovering, often to our surprise, the strength, the beauty, and the new paths still available within it. If this story brought you any peace, please subscribe to Jerry Tales and like this video. It helps us bring more stories that remind us how to find peace, even within our hardest moments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.